Hello, everyone. I am joined by Kate Wessel today. Kate, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah. Thank you for inviting me, Kirsten. It's good to see you on this sunny afternoon.
Yes, yes. So let me introduce you. So Kate Wessel is a clinical social worker who has been practicing for 15 years within schools and the community. And she specializes in stress and anxiety with kids and also supporting the adults who care for these kids. Um, Also, Kate is the mother to a pandemic preschooler. I think that is a new term. And she hopes that he will be actually heading to school in the fall. Yes.
Yes.
So I invited Kate to talk to me about stress, again, something that she specializes in, stress in kids, and how we recognize that stress and how we as adults can show up to support our kids when they are experiencing stress so that they can start to develop healthy ways to cope. So, Kate, I would love to start with you talking about the brain stress curve, something that
Sure.
you introduced me to that I think is just a wonderful model for understanding stress, both in kids and ourselves. And while you start talking about it, I'm going to share my screen so that people can see the visual as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, one of the things that I have found really helpful when I started practicing in the schools, when I started working with kids, and when I first came into the field, I was working with kids who were very dysregulated, struggling with a lot of social, emotional, mental health issues. And with very little knowledge, I came across several different models that use this idea of a curve to talk about brain stress or brain arousal. And really, what this visual does is that it helps us see um, that stress and how we experience stress, anxiety, brain arousal, which we'll talk about in just a second, isn't just a 1 to 100 thing. It's a build up to that top. For some kids, it's a steady, even like they round it up nice and slow. For other kids, it can feel like 1 to 100. It might feel like more of a roller coaster instead of a curve. But let's break this down a little bit. So, on a really good day, our brain is regulating itself. It's communicating evenly. So we have our front brain, which is our thinking brain. It's our brain that helps us think about cause and effect, help us plan. It helps us apply the knowledge we learned 6 months ago to what we're performing today. It's our prefrontal cortex is our PC. It's our personal computer, and then we have our back brain or our inside brain, which is our limbic system. And that's a part of our brain that connects us to animals. It's our reptilian brain.
Mm.
It's responsible for that. Our amygdala, our little stress alarm is back there, which is responsible for fight, flight, or freeze. And on good days when things are running smooth, our brain it's working together to integrate our environment, our emotions, our physiology, everything's working together. However, if that little amygdala, if our limbic system senses stress, and that stress might be perceived,
Mhm.
it could be real or not real.
Mhm.
Whether or not it's real or not real, it's going to send all kinds of physiological responses to us that's going to get our arousal up. And as our arousal gets up, if it continues to climb, there becomes a point where our prefrontal cortex lights out up here because we need to conserve energy to get our bodies into fight, flight, or freeze. So if we think about what happens when we go into fight, flight, or freeze, and what happens when our prefrontal cortex is shut down, is our behavior gets super dysregulated.
Mm.
So where we might have had a kid at a 1 who, like this kiddo here, is able to participate in reading, is able to do that distance learning, play nicely with siblings, um, stay quiet during your Zoom meetings. That would be a kid at a 1, right? They're able to problem solve, they're able to regulate any emotions, little bumps in the road, and then something happens, and it might be internal or external, but you start to notice that kiddo starts to act a little bit dysregulated. So at a 2, sometimes kids, you might notice a change in their tone of voice. Maybe they get more oppositional, more whiny. Maybe they shut down. A lot of kids, if you pay attention to this, you'll notice it with adults too, with spouses, friends, colleagues, you might notice a change in their affect, right? Maybe they're not as bubbly, maybe they're not as engaging, something kind of shifts there. And then as they continue up that stress curve, kids in particular, if they don't start using some tools at a 1.5, 2, they're going to hit that 3. And that 3 is when total lights out up here. I'm not thinking, I am just protecting myself from real or perceived danger. I am protecting myself from the fact that you asked me to put on my pajamas 20 times. Like that feels like an emergency right now because I'm up here. Or I'm afraid of bees, or back in the day of cavemen, that alarm would have gone off if there were a saber-toothed tiger at the front of our cave and we needed to protect ourselves, right? So for kids, it's very dysregulating. It's that safety alarm that's going off, that stress alarm that's telling them to protect themselves.
Yeah, and as you talk about when the lights out up front in our thinking brain, a lot of times I think, we'll either say out loud or think about our kids, what are you thinking? Well, they're not.
Right.
They can't, because that part of their brain is not properly functioning when they're dysregulated. So it's something important to remember. And you've talked a lot. You've talked a little today, and you've talked a lot with me about the importance of adult energy. So as kids arousal state, their brain arousal may be kind of ascending up that curve. It's important to pay attention to our own energy. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Absolutely. And just to add on to your point, that whole piece about how kids can't use that front of their brain, another thing to just keep in mind quickly is developmentally, that prefrontal cortex is the last part of our brain to fully develop. So, there's some research in reports that say in mid-20s, there was some that was saying into the early 30s. So just know, for kids, they're much quicker to go from that 1 to 3, or to not be able to regulate because they just don't have the skills, right?
So they need our help.
They do need our help. Yes, yeah, absolutely. We just had a situation up in my kitchen. My son is just kind of super energetic today. It could have something to do with that bowl of Lucky Charms he had with extra marshmallows. I don't know. And my wife was upstairs with him, and she's like, buddy, can you just control yourself? And I'm like, yeah, no, he can't. He really can't right now. But I think of how many times I think that in my head, just slow down. Yeah. So just like kids have their own brain arousal scale, one thing I started to talk with grownups who care for kids about is the whole idea of our adult energy scale. And when we talk about adult energy, it's how we're showing up. It's our verbals and nonverbals. So it's our tone of voice, our voice volume, our body language, our affect, our own internalized emotions. I think a lot of us who are around kids know that kids can be little emotional barometers, and they just can pick up on how you're feeling. So what tends to happen is when our kids are at a 1, we're making our Zoom calls, we're paying the bills, we're doing laundry, maybe we're taking a few minutes to ourselves because things seem calm and manageable. And so our energy is low. And then as our kids start to show signs of dysregulation, maybe they're getting oppositional, telling us no, maybe they're not following directions, our energy tends to go up. So now I've told my son to put his pajamas on. Put your pajamas on now. I'm getting louder. He continues to play with Legos. He's not doing what he should. He starts whining because I've asked him a lot, and it's all of this resistance. He gets to a 3 and starts crying. I start telling him, I told you, if you just would have put on your pajamas, we wouldn't be in this. You need to listen. I have told you 5 times. It's not you, whatever. I can keep it. It's like I live this or something. And then he's in total meltdown and inconsolable for the next 30 minutes now. And I feel like a horrible parent, or like I have a horrible kid. It depends on the day, really. The thing, once we're able to step back and think about it, the thing to remember is that when my energy rises, matches his level of dysregulation, I'm just feeling the flames of that dysregulation. Because remember, it's lights out up here. So he's not able to process what I'm saying, what I'm requesting of him. He's not able to respond rationally. He's just going into fight, flight, or freeze. And when my energy is up here, when my energy feels frenetic or he's not sure how to respond and he's already feeling like, oh, danger, danger, something's not right here, he's going to combat that by either shutting down, running away, fighting back, lots of different ways, and it's going to come out not pretty. So what we want to do then, and I think we might be getting to this in the next slide, is we want to think.
I just want to. I want to ask.
Yeah.
And when we talk about and somebody asked me about this the other day, the brain stress curve, when a child or an adult is at a 3, and they've got that kind of level of stress or brain arousal. When you talk about fight, flight, or freeze, that freeze, their energy level or the way they're responding might not feel heightened and intense and loud and big. It might be withdraw or freeze or numb, those kind of things. So what this doesn't say is how, this doesn't explain the behavior. What the curve shows is the level of arousal in the brain.
Yes.
Either shut us down or really wake us up in a big way.
Yes, you got it. You got it. Yes.
Awesome. Okay. So yes, I think what you were going to, and where I'd love you to go and where I think you were going next is how do we start to think about, how do we use this curve to start to understand what kids need from us?
Yes, absolutely.
All right.
And I think, Kirsten, what you and I have talked a lot about is how do we use this curve to help adults start partnering with kids, right? Because it's not that we want to ignore the behavior that can come with a 3. Even if a kid is disengaged or shut down, that's still not a healthy way. Even though it might not be combative, it's still not a healthy way to learn how to regulate and manage feelings. What we want to do is help kids build independence towards self-regulation. So they know, oh, something's not feeling right. I need to take care of myself. I need to talk to a parent or whatever. So what we want to do is we want to start moving towards partnering with our kids to help them learn how to co-regulate so that they can then self-regulate. So we want to shift where we put our energy and how we show up for our kids when they're calm and when they're at the height of dysregulation. So Dan Siegel is an amazing researcher, developmental pediatrician out in California. He is the author of many books, including The Whole Brain Child, which is a great audio book. I audibled it. So it's a great audiobook or read. And then this is from, I want to say, Aware. Yes. And it's really, he shifted his focus, going from that kind of brain-based exploration of children and behavior to kind of more of how can we be more mindful and present with our kids to help them build some of these skills. And he came up with something called the 4 S's, which he's since added a 5th S to, but they are sense making, and I'll explain them in just a second. In order for kids to feel safe and have a secure attachment and to be able to regulate from the adults in their life, they need to feel seen. They must feel secure, feel soothed, safe. And then that 5th S is sense making. So we want these 5 S's to be present all the time. But as you and I were speaking, Kirsten, we talked about how at different stages of that brain arousal, it makes sense that some of these S's show up a little bit more. It kind of gives us more of a framework of how do I show up for my kid to co-partner in self-regulation and help them build some skills towards independence, so we don't always have to hit this 3 and we all feel horrible. And so at a 1, what we want to do is we want to make sure our kid is feeling seen. And what that seen is about, it's about recognizing them, showing up with empathy, recognizing their experience, and building relationship, right? We have to have relationship to help our kids get through regulation, and then to help teach them some skills, which is where that sense making comes in. When we think about sense making, we're thinking about helping to give our kids context for their social emotional life, for their feelings, for the people around them, for relationships, so that things can become predictable. We can help them problem solve. At a 2, when we kind of start to see that yellow light, like slow down, something's not right here, we want to make sure that our kids feel soothed, like they know that this is a feeling that's temporary, it's going to come and it's going to go, that they feel secure, so they have that inner sense of well-being. Um, and then as things get hairy, as we get to that 3, and as it's lights out up here, rather than engaging with our kids and winding up in a really nasty power struggle, to start thinking about, okay, at a 3, my one and only job is to make sure this kid's safe, that we're not saying or doing anything that's causing harm.
Yeah.
As a parent, and I will tell you, I have a 5-year-old who has a lot of feelings and a lot of big reactions. It's very easy for me to get in a power struggle with him at a 3. That's causing him more harm, because it's just getting stuck and it's a power struggle, and then I'm losing that teaching moment at the end. So it's really being cognizant and aware of, okay, what do I need to do?
Yeah.
Slow down my energy. My energy needs to come at a 1, where I'm building that relationship, where we're working on skills, right? So it's kind of an inverse of our energy. So as our kids dysregulate, we re-regulate and draw back our energy. We're calm, we're neutral, using less words. Our body might be moving less.
Mm-hmm.
We maybe are taking a few deep breaths ourselves so that we're able to do that, right? We're kind of re-regulating ourselves so that we can kind of be there to put out the fire, not add to it.
Yeah, one of the things I love about this is when my kids get to a 3, the 2 things that are kind of my go-to are sense making. I want to talk about this because I'm a fixer. Let's solve this problem. Let's fix it. Let's make sense of it, right? So that we can figure it out. And the other place is I want to hug them. And sense making just doesn't work. It doesn't work for me either when I'm at that level. I don't want anybody making sense with me either. But one of my kids in particular does not want to be touched, does not want to be hugged at a 3. And so, that safety might come from just a touch on the shoulder, but a hug, a soothing hug, which actually is soothing for me when
Yes.
he's at a 3,
Yes.
does not work for him. But I have to really watch myself because those are my 2 go-tos, sense making and soothing.
I can relate to that. Absolutely. I'm such a hugger, and I just want my kiddo to feel better, because I think we know, right? We're grown-ups. We've been through it. This is no big deal, buddy. Just put on the pajamas. Like, it's going to be okay. Your Legos are there tomorrow. Unless they're not, because I've hit my limit. But it's really hard. And I think just being able to know your child, and if they don't like touch, because again, their processing is shut down, which includes sensory processing, which is, I think, in the midbrain. I could be wrong. All of that shuts down when our limbic system is on fire. So really being cautious about what we're expecting our kids to process. One of the visuals I get when I think about like trying to do that sense making at a 3 or at the top of the curve or roller coaster, it's like we're writing these beautiful messages and have all this great lessons, and we're really just crumpling it up and throwing it at a wall. Nothing's sticking at that point, right? It's just going to bounce back and hit us. But it's so tempting.
Oh, I know. Well, what I'd love to have you do as we kind of start to draw to a close, and I'm going to stop sharing here, is to share some ideas with parents or other adults that are caregivers to kids around what can they do. So this is awesome information. How can they take it and apply it like today?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. I think there's a few things. And the first thing that comes to mind is to show up and start regulating with yourself. Take a few minutes and think about, what do you look like? What does it feel like for you when you're at a 1, 2, and 3? How do you know when you're starting to get dysregulated? I think for a long time, I was showing up and supporting kids well before I had my own. And I wasn't paying attention to my own cues and clues that I was starting to get dysregulated. And I think when we don't take care of ourselves as a professional, as a parent, as somebody who shows up for kids, we burn out. And then it gets really hard to build that relationship with kids. So the first thing I would say is figure out how to fuel yourself, how to know yourself, and what your clues are that you're starting to get dysregulated so that you could tend to that before you hit your 3.
Awesome.
The second thing would be, as far as showing up for kids, we really want to be, kids are watching us all the time. They're sponges. Whether or not they agree with you and let you know, they are paying attention. So making sure you're modeling for them, like, oh, I'm super frustrated. I forgot to get broccoli at the grocery store and we were supposed to have broccoli tonight. What am I going to do? Kind of talking through those everyday emotions, talking through how you're problem solving, letting kids know uncomfortable feelings are here. There's no magic pill that's going to get rid of them. It's part of the human experience. Yeah. And I think all too often when we go back to that 3 and wanting to fix and sense makeup there, it's because it's really hard to see your kids having uncomfortable feelings and experiences, but they're going to, and they need to experience them to know how to deal with them. So that way, when they're off at college and they're disappointed, or off as a young adult and feeling disappointment, they can manage it on their own and not need you to sweep in and save them. The last thing I would say is just helping your child build that emotional vocabulary, helping them understand the experience they're having internally, because it's foreign to them. They don't understand it. They just know it's uncomfortable and it's big. So doing things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. If you can name it, you can tame it. If you can mention it, you can manage it. Right.
Yes.
So,
yes.
So helping give them the words to talk about what's going on for them, and then making it normal to talk about this stuff.
Yeah. Yes.
Like, this is part of how we learn and grow and go through our life as humans.
Yeah. And as you process it with them, if you have a kiddo who's angry or frustrated and acts out, the message I always want to teach kids is, hey, we all feel angry. We all feel frustrated. Those feelings are okay. Yeah. What starts to not be okay is how we express them if we're hurting others or ourselves. We want to deal with the behavior, not the emotion, and give them the way we want to deal with the emotions, to give them tools to manage it. We don't ever want to make them feel shame for having those uncomfortable feelings.
No, thank you for that. The one thing I would add to all of that is that the best time, as you mentioned, to teach these skills and to talk about, to practice that vocabulary and talking about it, is at a 1, right? When we're cool and collected, and to make it a part of routines, to practice it, because over time, I always like to say, practice does not make perfect, right? We're never going to be perfect. Practice makes progress, and over time, practice makes permanent, right? Habits form. And we want really good, healthy habits, so that when we experience that 3, when we feel like there's a real threat and we are in crisis, that we've got really great, healthy habits that show up.
Yes.
But that takes practice. That's over time.
Yes. Not perfection.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Any last thoughts before we say goodbye?
It is always a joy to connect with you, Kirsten. And I think you and I can go on and on about this. But I think we've said enough for today. So thank you so much for having me on, and I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you as well, Kate.
Yeah.